Hello everyone, welcome to Gallery 110. We are here to take in the work of Shruti Ghatak, and we enjoy her presence, her work. My name is Quinn Hallenbeck. I'm a local artist and arts consultant. My background is in dance. I have BFAs from the University of California in Irvine, but I've been a photographer, visual artist for the last 10 years and had the pleasure of consulting local artists, Camille Leatham, Nathan Voss, among others. And it's my pleasure to be in conversation with Shruti today. Thank you very much. So, please introduce yourself.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Shruti Ghatak. I'm a multidisciplinary artist working with painting and terracotta relief sculpture and trying to see how these two languages somehow meet. That has been my inquiry for this last year. I've been working in both of these mediums and trying to see where they can unify somehow. My main resource for paintings are stories that come from ancient mythologies, folklores, and everyday. Like the story doesn't have to be loaded. It can be something that we can find in our everyday life. And sometimes those moments feels like they're coming from a mythic environment. So I'm trying to see and combine these two worlds and see how past is not something a distant thing to remember, but it's something to live with, and how we can combine the present with the past and think of a better future.
And as far as your training is concerned, not only do you have a master's degree in painting from the New York Studio School, you also have a background in chemistry, but your artistic education began long before that formal education. How would you describe the kind of the birth of your artistic education?
Well, it started very early. Like every child, like we all start drawing. And the thing is, I never stopped doing it. Whatever I was doing as my main focus in academics or other things, I continued that thread of making art in some way or other.
Definitely.
So it was a continuous thread through my life. So I was enrolled in a local art school by my mom when I was 4, even before I was sent to like a grade school. And that was the first encounter with art, and it continued since then. But I grew up in a small place, so it didn't have much exposure. So it stopped when I was about 10 years old or something. And then the entire inquiry was self-driven. Seeing different artisans working with wood, clay, metalwork around that place, which is like superbly talented workers working in these different mediums, and seeing the environment around it. And the place I'm talking about is in the eastern part of India, West Bengal, the western part of West Bengal called Bankura. And the place has many terracotta temples. And the temple walls are covered with terracotta relief sculptures, talking about stories, depicting stories from different mythologies. In India, everyone knows those mythologies, the two main epics, Mahabharata and Ramayana. And the reliefs are the first thing which taught me that you can use form and material to tell stories. It's not just words. So earlier, I was an avid reader too, so I used to read stories. So I felt like stories can be just coming from books, novels, and stuff.
Yes.
But seeing those reliefs told me that we're telling stories, and it can be a visual thing.
Yes. You describe in one of your interviews with Chun Park for Brooklyn Gangnam magazine about your interaction with these stories, how what fascinates you, is how these myths were never fixed. For me, myth isn't something ancient or distant, it's a way of thinking about the world. Can you talk about that narrative tradition, how that informs the content of your work?
That's correct. These mythologies are the stories that I know, we know, and many people know. They are not fixed. They kind of evolve and evolve through time and generation and places. So we might see a little bit of different versions in different regions, and most of these folklore, especially, are oral traditions.
Mm-hmm.
So they're generated from generation, transferred from generation to other generations through just by stories orally transferred.
Yes.
And so there is a chance that they're evolving.
Mm-hmm.
So what someone's grandma told, and what that young girl will tell someone,
Mm-hmm.
they will mix experiences of their life,
Mm-hmm.
and they evolve like that, very much like language.
Yes.
Yeah, and a good language is one that is open to changes and open to receive other languages, and evolve with time, evolve with environment, and the same thing with these stories and mythologies. Mm-hmm. So they're not like a fixed thing.
Yes.
That happened in the past. Mm-hmm. If I'm telling that story now, I'll be combining the experience of my time with those.
And so there's this iterative cultural practice of telling and retelling these stories, not only orally, not only in writing, but also in the visual art, the terracotta relief sculptures. And that retelling not only happens from the storyteller's perspective, but also from the person taking it in. Someone looking at a terracotta relief story and telling themselves the narrative. And I'm very interested in how you bring that narrative into your process. Can you talk about your process? How something goes from your sketchbook into the works that we see on the wall?
Yeah, as you can see, most of these works are story-based. So I'm really, really drawn to stories and narratives. So sometimes there might be a lyrics or fragment of a poem, a fragment of a song, or maybe a story that I have read or listened to. I get some kind of visuals, like listening or staying with those things. So let's say I read a poem and I'm staying with that poem for 1, 2, 3, 4 days, and sometimes I will get visuals.
Ah.
And they will evolve through drawing. So the first appearance of those visuals will be in the form of a drawing in a sketchbook.
In charcoal, pen, pencil?
Whatever I will get. Like sometimes in the back of any receipts or something.
Wow.
And half of the time they're not saved. So they start, sometimes I'm waiting in the car for something and I have something and I just draw.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, that drawing will evolve and the concept will evolve and find what size I might want to evolve that story into. And then the painting start, and sometimes the relief start at the same time. So the relief initially started as part of the studies for paintings, because I'm also a trained sculptor, and I see things in forms. So I'll be making those reliefs to get information from my painting, because most of these paintings that you are seeing, they're figurative paintings. I'm not using any models or any photo references. I do have a mirror in my studio, so it kind of gets more like a performance. Because they're made up stories, they're not real, but I want to make them real.
Yes.
So with that performative act, I feel like I'm living in those characters. And I'm making those gestures multiple times and seeing myself. So it kind of becomes an act of make-believe.
You're embodying the work
Yeah.
in that performance.
Exactly. So that performance part is not visible in the show, but it's a big part of my process. Like seeing myself in the mirror, or sometimes, let's say I have the form or the garment. I sometimes tie those things around the chair to see how the folds will reform. And using that as reference, making drawings, or sometimes building something, and then, or directly going to the painting. Or sometimes painting is halfway through, and then I'm stuck.
Yes.
I can't move in. So then pause, go back to the drawing, or go back to the relief, and then go back to the painting again. So it's kind of like all at the same time, but also like taking turns and trying to understand through different formats.
Yes. That process kind of reminds me of that act of storytelling, always going back to a source text and kind of coming forward, moving forward. I also like how you describe seeing yourself in your work, seeing yourself being an integral part of making the work, seeing yourself in the mirror and imparting that figure into this mythical realm of your story, your narrative paintings, your figurative paintings. You also mentioned the garment, which would be the Dupatta?
That's correct, yeah, especially for this show. It's the Dupatta that's kind of tying this entire show together. It kind of started with this work that I made last year. It appeared in my show at the King Street Station. Earlier, this work was just a painting. I'll tell you like how this work started. When I was growing up, the kind of clothes, like, let's say we turned 10, 11, we started wearing from frocks to this kind of salwar suit or salwar kameez with this scarf or extra fabric that you're supposed to put on your chest in form of modesty or covering. So I questioned, like, I'm already wearing a dress, so the dress would be more like what I'm wearing now. So putting something on top of it, and everything is covered, what I need to cover on top of this. So that was my question. And there are some societal norms that you have to wear it in a certain way. So this work is an answer to that. And I was seeing this as a powerful tool than a restriction. So when my daughter was growing up, first time I bought a salwar suit for her, this kind of dress that came with the dupatta. I didn't explain to her what this is for. So one day she came running and telling that this is my wing. And then she tied it around her neck and telling me, well, look, I'm a superhero.
It's a cape.
So when you're not putting a name to it, it's open for imagination, open for free interpretation. So it goes into the realm of liberation. So that was the thing that struck with me, that ended up here with the story. Seeing women taking the agency, using the way they want, and wanted to be whatever they want to be, taking the power.
And you write in your artist statement very eloquently, the dupatta is reimagined not as a constraint, but as a tool of imagination and freedom. Can you talk about that as a potential way of like constraints on your own work, your process, the constraints of the material? Do you find those constraints as a way of like freeing your expression as an artist? Or do they also feel restrictive?
I'd say it's freeing, not restrictive. And I think I'm freeing those restrictions through this work.
Yes.
And they become a way of like building the form, building the composition. It becomes a compositional tool, like how I was using that form in multiple of these paintings that you're seeing, kind of a form that's kind of using the wind, the form that kind of like using the night sky, and what it's doing with the composition. So it kind of became a compositional tool for these paintings.
And when talking about form, composition, the limits of a material, what makes you choose terracotta, sculpture, or painting when you're kind of approaching that form and that composition? Like you simultaneously work in both of them. What does each medium allow you to express?
Yeah, paint has certain things that we can do with paint, and clay has certain things I can do with clay. But at the same time, I'm interested in seeing how some painterly moments can be translated onto clay. So these reliefs that you're seeing, even though they're inspired by the temples I grew up seeing, they have a painterly quality than what I was looking at the temples. They have the forms. Here I'm kind of using them the way I kind of use my brush strokes, and using a tool to kind of push and move the clay as if I'm pushing the paint. And same thing I do, like the strength of each of these mediums I try to like bring from here to the other medium. And the strength of clay is you can see form so easily in this. And using that to bring in my paintings. So in my paintings you can see like they are very form-based. And they are not very literal. So I try to stay with the form and see how we can make it open for interpretation for the audience.
I really like to hear that dialogue between your materials, how your practice as a painter informs how you approach the sculpture. And earlier you described at first the terracotta relief were studies for your paintings, but now they've become an expression in themselves.
That's correct.
And I really appreciate your painting informs how you sculpt, and how your sculpture informs how you approach your painting as well. So now they are an integrated practice.
So that's where I landed up here. So it started with the painting, and then I was making the reliefs separately as form of a study for the painting. And sometimes last year it evolved into like just not as studies but independent reliefs. Sometimes I was making relief from the painting. So the painting started first, and then maybe midway I started building the relief, or maybe after the painting. And then sometimes I built relief just for them. So they got the freedom of not being the studies and living their own life. And I was trying to find like how I can unify these two languages, and how I'm wanting to see them together, not side by side. So this was the effort or experiment, you can say, where I'm seeing the relief with the painting. And I'm interested also in the architecture of the temples, and not just temples, like architecture of like many different ritualistic places, and how they're very similar and different in so unique ways. So arches you can see in temples, in mosques, and in churches. So it's kind of a unified language that you're kind of embodying all faiths.
Yes.
So seeing them together in form of an architecture of element, and that's how this arch thing came first time in my work.
Yes.
They were part of the relief earlier. Now the relief became part of the arch. So, and then also using other materials like the fabric and wood into that language, and seeing how craft tradition can be combined with fine art. And there's always that kind of thing that fine art is more superior than craft, and I never believed in that part. So wanted to see how we can combine all these languages and build an unified language to call just art. It is not, there is no hierarchy there.
Definitely. And bringing that unity of your languages and practices into this work, we have fabric, we have painting, we have relief, we have sculpture, and you bring them together under the term liminal space. Can you talk a little bit about that concept of the liminal. I have my own thoughts as well of like temples as liminal spaces between the mundane and the sacred that you're navigating. But can you talk about how you came to develop that concept for this show, liminal space?
Yeah, so the way I see liminal is a space in between. Neither this nor that. So I'm interested in that particular area where you are not naming something, either this or that.
Mm-hmm.
It can be both, or it can sit in the middle. So many of my works, like especially this one, started at that adolescent time. So it's also a time it's hard to describe whether you're an adult or whether it's a child.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes with a lot of different questions and answers, which is undefined. And I find that that kind of space and time is very liminal for any girl. So that's another way. And then I also wanted to see how the past and present, where is the boundary, or is there any?
Mm-hmm.
Because when we think of memory, we are thinking about the past, but we are living in the present. So which one is real? Is the memory real or unreal? Everything is real. So I know Picasso has a great quote, everything you can imagine is real. So it's also a space where you're present, but you're thinking about the past. But you're thinking about the past sitting in the present.
Yes.
So everything is present.
And I had this question about your work where you describe in an interview with, let's see, Savita, you describe how your work, you collapse historical and contemporary time, weaving mythological themes with the personal, and that you make these visual pieces as a dialogue between the past and the present. I want to ask about the role of the future in your thought and work.
Yeah, it's a great question. What you can hope for future is having peace. This time, that's the most desired feeling for I think everyone. We want peace.
Yes.
And we want humanity. That's we are losing at this moment. So through this work, they're kind of a very coming from a certain feelings, a certain moment, a certain stories. They are talking about a universal language of hope, of transformation, of living in a future which can dream of having the most human connection. So I think it's trying to access those.
Yeah, definitely. And other themes in your work that I think about, like the pursuit of peace, migration is an important part of your experience and what you bring to your work as well. Also in this interview, there's some beautiful, in these interviews, there's beautiful words comparing the clay as a fundamental medium. It is the earth. And I was struck by a comparison of like footprints in the earth to your impression in the terracotta as well. And you also speak about the liminality of girlhood. I want to tie all of these things together and ask kind of broadly about your work. Can you talk about the experience of migration, about girls becoming women, and the role of women in your work and your process?
Yeah, it's again coming and starting with that liminal space. So when we see someone in a different land, in a different landscape, they're not just living in that new landscape. They are also living in a landscape of their mind, and how these two landscapes sit side by side. So I wanted to see how to combine these landscapes and how to think of a world without borders.
Mm-hmm.
Like how a plant from a different part and an environment from a different part can collide and combine and see. maybe seeing person from a very different region on a different region. So like seeing all this kind of amalgamation of things. So in the form of how we see migration. So whenever we see think of migration, the first thing that comes to your mind is birds. So birds is a recurring theme in many of my works, not just birds and many animals that I use. So plant world, human and animal, they all come together in that space where we're seeing of the world living together.
Yes, your work is full of natural motifs, the landscape, animals. Can you talk a little bit about how you collect those motifs and to employ in your work? Is it on walks or is it also an act of imagination?
Well, I'd suggest it comes through other sources than art. The poems I'm reading, the music I'm listening, or let's say I'm in a party and talking to someone, and some conversation struck with me. And the residual essence of that conversation might end up in a visual. So something like that, and I'll explain by using a recent poem. Not a recent poem, I have read that poem multiple times in my life, but recently I was thinking about that poem by Jivananand Das, I read in Bangla. Translated poem doesn't work for me. So I mostly read in Bangla. So it's talking about a poet who wrote in Bangla, in one of the poem that has a word, Shonali Danal Chil, a bird with a golden wing. So the golden wing, when the wing turns golden. Right? So it's that phrase stayed with me when I was cooking, when I was doing something else, when I was teaching it. So that Sonali Danal, but the mood of that poem is very different. It's very dark. But that specific phrase that I stayed with, I wanted to see how those wings can hold that golden light. And I landed with that painting.
That's beautiful.
But the painting is very different than the exact mood of the poem. Because I was not literally translating the poem. I was just staying with that essence of that specific phrase and wanted to see how I can capture that specific light.
Definitely. I want to pivot and work to situate your practice in the context of European and Western art traditions. Earlier you mentioned Picasso. I also see a lot of resonance with Cézanne and his kind of building of structure through the use of color itself, color is such a strong and important part of your work. It also, for me, holds a lot of similarity with Odilon Redon's pastels, their vibrance, and also their spiritual quality, how they seem to emit their own kind of light. I also would like to recall, you mentioned temples, churches, and I'm thinking of cathedrals in Europe, and the triptych and diptych that is a part of Western kind of culture, church practice, especially Netherlandish painters. A triptych would be, there's this folded altar, and then it would unfold, and there would be a narrative painting on 3 panels, usually in 3 parts. I'm curious, does the diptych or triptych influence your work?
It does. It does. I'm interested in seeing how a narrative can be broken and also seen together through panels. So it's kind of transferring from one region to the other region through those panels and how they can be collapsed. And there is a space between these panels. So again, kind of trying to see the gap between things. So the fragmentation and also finding the wholeness in them.
This work is titled Catching the Wind. It's acrylic on canvas, 48 by 72, and it's actually on 2 canvases. it's a diptych in that sense. Shruti Ghatak is off screen at the moment, but we're going to situate this work in the context of Western art history. So first, beginning with the technique, I see a lot of color blocking, like Cézanne. When you are designing a painting, you've talked about your process, how you'll turn to terracotta and make drawings and perform in front of the mirror. When you come to the canvas, do you lay down a design with pencil, or do you approach it immediately with the medium?
I approach it immediately with paint. Do not draw that much. So it's more like a color-to-color relationship and how things are evolving through that surface and atmosphere. But I do sometimes think about color before I start the painting. Sometimes like seeing colors next to each other, more like swatches, and like seeing the vibrancy of the color, the frequency next to each other, and how they might come together in a sense. And sometimes color also comes from what I'm seeing around me. So when I started this painting, the forsythia was blooming in March. So I was seeing that through the window. So that yellow started coming in my work without me knowing, without me thinking about it. Because that's something I was seeing around. So that also happens, and maybe some information from a different painting that I'm working on. Color also comes from that and plays into this.
And you also mentioned earlier about the poem, mentioning that phrase, the golden wing, as a way of generating the kind of content of this work. Speaking of the content, is this work kind of inspired by that phrase, the golden wing?
That's correct. I wanted to see when and how the light will create that kind of atmosphere where the bird is holding that kind of light. You know, like Shonali Dalajil. So if I translate it, it's a bird whose wings are golden. So when a wing turns golden, when the light is like doing that kind of thing. So I wanted to capture that light and that atmosphere, and birds are flying while they're catching that kind of light, that golden light in their wings.
Yes.
And blending in what I wanted to bring as the narrative for the painting.
Yeah, speaking of the narrative, compositionally, we have a figure on the left panel, and then the sky and birds on the right side panel. And it's implied that we are in the sky, that this figure is flying and catching the wind with her dupatta, kind of bringing in that release of restrictions in this painting.
Yeah, so as this dupatta was part of the restriction while I was growing up, I wanted to release it from that restriction part and wanted to make it a part of imagination and freedom, and wanted to see what it can do for a painting when I'm bringing it as a compositional device and a symbolic element. So just wanted to see what it can do with that painting surface and the architecture of the painting. So that was one element, and blending in this poem that I was reading at that moment, and the colors that I was seeing around me in the nature. So all together, and wanted to see like how the diptych is kind of moving that narrative from one panel to the other panel. So that concept of diptych and triptych I'm really interested in. When you see two panels, there is a continuation going from one to another. So that's I wanted to bring, but there is also a gap between them, right? So how that narrative gets broken and also put together at the same time. So these are the elements I really wanted to explore and experiment with when I'm working with diptychs and triptychs, and that I'm really drawn to, and from Western art. But it's not just in Western art. You see this kind of elements in a couple of folk art in India. It's called, one of them is called kapar. It's a wooden box with panels that opens up, multiple panels. So when the box is closed, it looks like a closed cupboard. And when you are opening those panels, it exposes those narratives. And eventually, at the end, the final image will be revealed.
Yes.
So that kind of element of different fragmentation and putting them together.
Mm-hmm.
So these elements, both in Western art and also things that I have seen in Indian art and folk genre, I wanted to experiment that language.
Mm-hmm. I really enjoy hearing about that similarity in artistic tradition, like Flemish altarpieces, these traveling altars, and having these kind of images on the front to be revealed and revealing a narrative.
Yeah.
And I love how you talk about that fragmentation and kind of how you're bringing that into your work. I think even on the level of the brushstroke, there's an attention to fragmentation and like spatiality. Like in these sunbeams coming down, how you've blocked out the color with your brush is fragmented, but part of a larger whole. And I also love that in this work, we have the two pieces. And with this kind of attention to history, there's almost an implied closure that was there. There was an implied kind of restriction or hiding that has been revealed in this piece. And I really do feel that sense of release. Also, in talking about Cézanne, Redon, there's also a lot of Fragonard referenced, especially in the attention to light and in the content of the work. Whereas in Fragonard, there'd be small angels and wings and birds. Can you talk a little bit more about your attention to the light in the content?
Yeah, I was really drawn to the kind of light and the imaginary narrative that we built in those history paintings.
Yes.
So you'll see angels flying in the sky. That's not something that really happened. But in our imagination, we always think about these things. As if I'm happy, I'm over the moon, I'm running on the cloud. So these kind of phrases when we use, I wanted to see how to look like.
Yes. Yeah. These metaphors we live by.
These metaphors lived by and then performing. So I'm doing these gestures and seeing myself, what my legs are going to do, what my hands are going to do. So with this performative act and doing this multiple times and seeing myself multiple times, as if even though it's not real, it didn't happen, I'm not going to happen, it feels like I'm making them real.
And thank you. It's beautiful how you talk about that imaginative space, and you talk about that being a really important part of your process. Imagination of the figure, working from imagination. And thank you for bringing this work of imagination to life.
Thank you. This is a work on wood. The title of the work is Wind She Is. So you can see I'm really interested in experimenting with scale. It's a big shift from the work that we discussed before, which was a larger piece, and this is quite smaller. So what we do when we work in small scale and when we work in large scale, and that intimacy with small scale work and that expansiveness when you're working large, and your gesture and movement and your actions are different. So that kind of space and that kind of shift in working in two different scales, I'm really interested in seeing, and also interested in seeing how I'm kind of bringing or working or experimenting with different shapes than just square or rectangle. So here I'm bringing in this architectural element that is a big part of my work and my inspiration of my work, because I refer to the narratives of terracotta temples that I grew up seeing. And these arches and the doorways, the shapes of those, and not just in temples, but it's a universal language of all different architecture of different faiths. Think of mosques, think of temples, think of churches. Almost all these architectural spaces has this kind of common element. I wanted to bring that in that language of painting and see what I can do with this and how they work towards the composition.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that sense of scale, there is a sense of, for me, play with a sense of scale, because the arched shape of the material implies grand scale architecture. I immediately think of mosques, cathedrals, temples, as well as small altars too. Can often have that shape.
Yeah.
With this material also there's an interesting historical interaction. It was an early solution to paint on wood panels, and you've expanded that in a kind of research onto the full surface of the painting that I find very interesting. Can you talk about the finding a solution to expanding beyond the frame and kind of painting on the full surface of the object? How did you approach that?
Yeah, in my earlier discussion with diptych and diptych, I mentioned about the kabar, the wooden box or the portable shrine. Those are wooden boxes. So the material is wood, and the paintings that was done on top of that box. So it's kind of bringing in that element, you know. So those doors are the panels, and how you are kind of combining the painting on top of that. So again, the box is a craft, and painting is a painting. Again, you're combining this craft and fine art material and bridging those gaps, because I'm not interested in that hierarchy, but I'm interested in that blend. Not putting them in different kind of boxes, but it's art.
Yes, and we see throughout this entire show the kind of fruits of your research, blending fabric materials with canvas, expanding the tradition of painting on wood in this piece, the kind of reference to the diptych, as well as the blending of terracotta and canvas in the same visual space.
Yeah, the title of this work is Flowing Red.
Flowing red, that's correct.
So there is a dupatta tied around the neck as a cape, and there is an actual dupatta. It's my dupatta. That's part of the painting that's flowing from the back of the painting. So I wanted to include these elements of fabric and craft. That's another aspect of my work that I do, and wanted to combine it with actual painting. So you're seeing this part of the painting, which is an oil painting on linen, and there's a fabric. I sewed this part, and I wanted to bring these two elements where craft and fine art is meeting together. I wanted to see a couple of other things than painting that I do and have been doing since as a very young kid with my mom, like using fabric, sewing fabric, printing on fabric, dyeing fabric, and using wax technique to create batik patterns and tie-dye patterns. So all those different kind of crafts and working with fabric, that's something I'm really interested in and wanted to see how I can blend these materials with actual painting. And flowing red, you know, as we are talking about the liminal space, and we are also talking about a stage where a girl enters the womanhood. It's also a time when menstruation starts.
you mentioned in this materials, this is the artist Dupatta, and you mentioned craft traditions. Who would make a dupatta in India, and would it be modified by the wearer in any way?
Yes. So the fabric here is modified, and then it's store-bought. This fabric is store-bought, and then I bought another fabric and I sewed it together and made this like embroideries. So that part I wanted to see, like someone made the fabric, woven the fabric, and that's also another art form, right?
Yes.
So how I'm blending these old materials and craft tradition, and what I'm doing with this and continuing, and how I'm kind of bridging these two elements with a painting medium.
Yes, and you mentioned these kinds of moments of liminality, such as menstruation. I'm also thinking about that kind of inheritance from like mother to daughter and that sharing of experience. Fabrics are also passed down family lines. It becomes an inheritance, and by kind of accepting modification as like a way of adding on to that tradition, we also see that kind of with your blending of these two mediums. You've kind of inherited the medium of fabric and the medium of oil on linen, and you're kind of modifying them together, trying to bring fabric and the linen, trying to connect almost those two fabrics together in an interesting way. Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
This piece is titled My Dupatta is My Cape. It's oil on canvas, terracotta panels, and acrylic on wood. Beginning with the oil on canvas in the center, we see a figure with 3 heads wearing a dupatta as a cape, as we've seen in other works as well. We have a sun in the center, or a source of light, creating an arched shape, which is echoed in the terracotta tile. This terracotta tile also has figures riding a bicycle, figures in kind of a cubist treatment, and this terracotta panel is mounted on a wooden arch. This wooden staircase, also constructed by the artist, is acrylic, and similar to, as we saw in The Wind She Is, that work on a wood panel that has been arched, we have paint directly applied to the wood. Together, these 3 elements evoke a temple, especially an Indian temple. We have the terracotta relief forming the arch, the staircase forming almost an altar space, welcoming us into the painting itself. The figure references, especially in East Asian and South Asian traditions, gods or divine figures with many different facets, each head or each arm kind of representing, embodying a different aspect of that deity. It's almost as if we are imagining this young girl as a deity, kind of to inspire us to also let go of our restraints and finding new freedom in it, a new heroism in it as well. Shruti earlier spoke about the blend of terracotta in her process as well as painting, how she is trying to approach her treatment of terracotta medium as a painter, creating painterly moments, as well as treating the material of the paint, in this case oil, as a sculpting medium. And in this way, she's continuing her investigation of bringing craft traditions into a fine art space, blending them into a